Digital sounds can be represented by an array of integer values. For this question, you will write two unrelated methods of the sound class. Here is a partial declaration of the sound class. So the array of values in this sound, guaranteed not to be null, changes those values in this sound that have an amplitude greater than limit. Okay, so there's a method called limit amplitude that basically is supposed to limit the maximum value of any number in this array. I'm sure they'll talk more about that in a minute. Part B removes all silence from the beginning of the sound. So from the beginning of the array, it's supposed to remove all zeros. And we know that it will have at least one non-zero value. And the length of the samples reflects the removal of, okay. So the length of the array afterwards is the array with no zeros at the beginning. Okay. Okay, so there are positive and negative values in this array. And what we're looking for is the absolute maximum. So there's two different things you could do. You could use math.absolute, or we can just do what they're suggesting here. Anything that is greater than the positive value of limit is replaced with limit. Anything that is less than negative value of limit is replaced with negative limit. The method returns the number of values that were changed. So that is something you have to keep track of. So here's an example. Assume the array has this in it. And the method limit amplitude takes a parameter, an integer parameter, in this case 2000. So you have to go through this array and replace anything that is greater than positive 2000 with the number 2000. Anything that is less than negative 2000 should be replaced with negative 2000. And I should keep track of how many numbers it had to change and return that. All right, so I'm gonna skip the help because you wouldn't get that on the exam, but you can use that if you want to go back and do this. So the limit amplitude. So if you remember, the first thing we're going to need is to store the number of things that we changed. So I'm going to have an int changes, and I'm going to set it to 0 because we haven't changed anything yet. And I'm actually going to put at the bottom of my method a return changes. By default, we didn't make any changes. But now what I need to do is go through every element in the array, and I'm going to have to change them. Can I use an enhanced for each loop for this problem? Why or why not? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it and then type in your answer. So don't type anything in the chat yet. Don't say anything out loud. I'll give you 30 seconds to think about, can I use an enhanced for loop to change values in an array? I'm going to get a glass of water while you're thinking. All right. go ahead and hit enter, type your answer in. Can we use an enhanced for loop? So we got a few no's. There isn't an easy way. Yep. So far, I think Zoe has explained it the best. So the problem with an enhanced for loop is, let's just write one. For int value in samples. Right. So the logic that I want, I'm just going to go ahead and do the logic now. Say if value is greater than the limit, then I'm going to set the value equal to the limit. Right? Else, if value is less than -1 times limit, value equals -1 times limit. Right? So this is basically the logic that I need. The problem is value is just getting a copy of whatever is in the array. So when I change the value, I'm not changing the array. I'm just changing this local variable. So even though the logic is kind of correct, this for loop, enhanced for each loop will not work because I have no access to the actual array itself using this. As Peter said, I could maybe kind of try to figure out where I am with the counter and this, and then, but like, this is just, as you guys were saying, this is just the wrong way to do this. So what I really need to do is say 0i is less than samples.length. And this time I don't need parentheses because it's an array, I plus plus. So if samples at position I is greater than the limit, then I can set inside the array samples I to limit. Samples I is less than -1 times the limit. Samples I becomes equal to the negative. All right. So what have I forgotten? Or is that correct? You can just type it in. Life pro tip, always reread the question when you think you are done. Always, 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 always reread the question when you think you are done. Peter is correct. Zoe is correct. Anyone else that types the same thing is going to be correct. I never changed the number of changes. So if I have to set the limit, then I have to say changes plus plus. And if I have to set a negative limit, I have to say changes plus plus. That is going to limit all the values in the array. For every position in the array, if the sample at that position is greater than the limit, set the sample at that position equal to the limit and increment the number of changes. Else, if the samples is less than the negative limit, set the samples equal to the negative limit and increase the number of changes. So let's see if this works. First try. I am the greatest programmer alive. So that is the answer to that question. Any questions on how I did that Why I didn't do it a different way. Suggestions for making it better. Suggestions for making it worse. All right. So let's go on to part B. So part B is the trim silence from beginning. So basically what we need to do is, you see how in this example, there's a whole bunch of zeros at the beginning of the array. We want to get rid of those zeros and restore the array back in the same private variable, property, attribute, whatever you want to call it. So here's my question to you. Why don't I just resize the existing array to get rid of all the zeros? Anyone have a guess on why I can't just like count the zeros at the beginning and then resize the array? There we go. You cannot resize an array in Java. You can create a new array and copy everything over, or, you know, as much as it will fit, but you cannot resize an array in Java. Java allocates a specific amount of memory to an array, and that is there forever until you end your program or whatever. So what is our array? Samples is our array. So we know that we're going to have to make a new array, at least temporarily. So we need an int new array. We don't know how long it's going to be yet. So there are a few different ways that we can approach this problem. The idea that's coming to me in my head right now is that first thing we have to do is count the number of zeros. Once we have that number, we create a new array, which is only as long as the original array minus that count. And then we go through the original array starting at count and copy all those values into the new array. And then finally, we set that new array, we set it to be the private property of the object. So there's a few steps. So I would do this when I'm programming, and I highly recommend you do it as well, is just write in English what you're planning on doing in comments or on a piece of paper. So count leading zeros, create new array of length original minus count, go through original starting at count, and copy each value into new array. And then set samples to be the new array. So I always do this, and I would highly recommend you guys do this as well. Just in English, write down your algorithm in comments, and you can just leave them in there with your code, right? Because that way, when you go back later to look at your code, you're like, why did I do this, right? You can actually remember why you did stuff. All right, so I think the easiest way to do this is with a while loop. We could do a for loop, but then we're going through the whole array for no reason. Or we could break out of it. But a while loop seems right. Like as long, while loop, if you, in your mind you're saying as long as, that's a while loop. That's a while loop flag thrown on the field, right? So I'm going to start equals 0 while samples position. I guess I shouldn't call it start. I should call it like position. Samples at position. Oh, I almost did it. I almost used an equal sign for a string. Equals, wait a minute. Oh, I can use equals because it's an integer. Equals 0, right? It's not a string. Sorry, false alarm, false alarm. Position plus plus. All right, so what I'm doing here is position is going to start at 0, and it's going to move through the positions as long as the array at that position equals 0. So in this example, it's going to start at 0. Is it 0? Yes. So it adds 1. Is it 0? Yes. Add 1. Is it 0? Yes. Add 1. Is it 0? Yes. Add 1. Is it 0? No. Break out of the while loop. So here's my question for you. I don't know if I can make this bigger. Hopefully I can. There we go. What is going to be the value of pause, POS, at the end of this while loop? I'll give you 10 seconds. 15. Bing, 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 bing. Bing, 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 bing. All right, what's going to be the value of pause? POS. Anyone wish to argue with Zoe, Peter, and Grant? Have a different idea? No rebels in the class? All right, fine. It is, right? It is going to be 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then it gets here and it does not add 1 anymore. All right, so now we want to create a new array of length original minus count. So we're going to say new array equals new int of samples.length minus count. Okay, so we just created a brand new array of integers, and the length is going to be the same length as samples minus however many zeros are at the beginning of that array. So now I want to go through the original, starting at position 4, right? Because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Go all the way to the end. Even if there are zeros, we don't care about those zeros. We only care about the zeros at the beginning. And populate our new array. So I cannot use an enhanced for each loop because I need to know the position. So for int I, I'm not going to start at 0. I'm going to start at count. There's 2 different ways I could do this, but I'm going to start at count. I needs to be less than samples.length and increment every time. All right, so I'm going to say new array I equals samples of I. What is the problem with this logic? Why is this not going to work? So what's going to happen here is new array will go off its own end. Right? Remember, new array might be length 5, samples might be length 10. So I have to go all the way to 10 to get the last sample. But if I try to stick that in position 10 in my new array, Java's going to barf. I want to put whatever's in position 4 in samples into position 0 in new array. All right, whatever was after the zeros here in position 4 in my original samples needs to go in position 0 in my new array. 5 needs to go into 1, 6 needs to go into 2, 7 needs to go into 3, and so on and so on. So I need to subtract count because it has to start at 0 in my new array, even though it's starting at count in the samples array, right? Remember, I'm trying to move everything after the zeros to the beginning of the array. And then the last thing, samples equals new array. All right, let's give it a shot. Thought I was going to go 2 for 2. Count. Oh, I mixed my, okay. So let's call it count. I was so close to being the greatest programmer alive. Mixing and matching. Huzzah! All right, maybe I'm the second greatest programmer alive. So this was a harder problem. Right, there was a lot of stuff to keep track of, but this is exactly the type of problem you will get on the AP. So it's just practice. Honestly, it's just practice. There is no magic to this. Again, I would write out in English in comments your first ideas on how to make it work. And you can put comments on the AP exam. There's no harm in doing that. And if it gives your grader a little bit more insight into what you were trying to do, hey, you might get a point where you otherwise wouldn't. So there is no harm in writing your thoughts in comments in your code.